Often, the lazy, idiotic, and uninformed like to poke and prod at those who critique trans ideology with questions which are not intended to elicit a response or to offer an answer to a needed question, but to provoke and shut down any conversation. They intend to offend you. They don't actually care about your response. However, I've been asked these questions enough to have formulated responses to them, though I doubt those who actually ask care to hear them. One of the most common questions is, why do you care? Quite simply, because gender ideology is not a fringe movement. It has thoroughly invaded all aspects of life, from culture to medicine and legislation. The definition of female has been replaced by a religious reinterpretation which is misogynistic and sexist at its core, which prioritizes gender identity over material reality and defines womanhood by stereotypes in order to allow men who fetishize womanhood to identify as such, and for that fetish to be protected by the law.
Trans people see themselves, they really do, as the gender they identify as. And I think if a lot of people would start to, change and see themselves as the gender that they are presenting themselves as and identify as, there'd be a lot less negativity. In the locker room, you never really see anybody's parts anyways. So nobody really knows what I have down there unless I tell them.
Unless you tell them. I know that the district did try to accommodate you, and they provided a separate locker room, a separate changing room just for you, but you still wanted to be in the girls' locker room because that's how you identify. Why?
It's because I'm a girl, and I feel like it's weird to be removed from all the other girls, and I feel kind of like, here are the boys, and then here are the girls. Oh yeah, here's Lila. And I really didn't like that. I felt kind of separated.
Because I care about other people. Young men and women are being told that hormones and surgery will cure their dissatisfaction with their bodies, and are serving as profitable experiments for the medical lobby without informed consent.
You speak up. I'm extremely worried and fearful about this decision to continue this blanket ban, and I want to ask the Minister about his reliance for the terms of reference and reasons for this on the purpose for which these drugs are being prescribed, i.e. being trans, when they are safely used by young people for other conditions, as he acknowledges. Does he understand that this is at heart discriminatory?
I do not agree with the characterisation of the Honourable Member. There are a whole range of medicines that are prescribed for a whole range of uses among a whole range of patient cohorts, but may well be unsafe or inappropriate or ineffective for use for other patients with other conditions. That is a basic fact of medicine, and if I may say so, her intervention is why we should listen to clinicians, not politicians.
Not only are many of these individuals simply homosexual and uncomfortable with the pressures to conform to gender stereotypes, but many are uneasy with the increasingly misogynistic treatment of women and girls, and seek to avoid it by identifying out of their sex. Ignoring a problem does not make it go away, and the minority stress model, which argues that accompanying mental health issues like depression and anxiety will be alleviated if a person transitions, is really not scientifically supported. Rarely are the sources of these ailments investigated or treated on their own, such as past abuse, PTSD, or a lack of offline social support. The assumption is that any opponent to transitioning simply doesn't understand, rather than acknowledging that many who oppose transitioning have experienced similar gender dysphoria, body dysmorphia, or mental illness. In turn, the underlying compassion in those who are gender critical is written off as cruelty, because that better preserves the victim narrative.
But similarly, I suppose sloganeering does an awful lot. All of a sudden, about 7 years ago, you got the phrase trans women are women just being repeated as a mantra, even though that's factually wrong. And they can't be, because by definition, trans women are not women. They are...
Well, we don't need to get into that because, again, it's just a linguistic trick, isn't it? I mean, I can say that it's true, or I can say it's not true. It just depends on what I mean by the word women.
That's right. It's like transubstantiation. It's like saying this is the body of Christ. You just say it. You just assert it. You don't need to prove that it has actually physically turned into the flesh.
Right, but if a woman is something different from a biological female, then you can say that trans women are women.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty true.
If this table is a pigeon, then I now have my hand rested on a pigeon. But as you know, language and society can't work that way. We have to have agreed definitions of things for anything to be achieved. Everyone knows that what we mean by a woman, we know that it's a biological classification. And if you want to change that, that's going to be a much bigger project because, again, it's one of those things that just hasn't caught on. Like everyone.
But don't you think that you can have a conceptual change on the basis of one minority asserting its different point of view about something? So, homosexuals used to be perverts. That used to be a perversion. You see, sort of mental illness, right? It no longer is because gay people said, well, hang on, we're not perverts. We're just a different type,
But it was
guys.
No, I mean, the mistake there is that homosexuality was never a perversion. It was simply perceived as a perversion. So the fundamental truth of it hasn't
shifted.
Right,
it may be the case that the concept of womanhood can be divorced from biological femininity.
No, what you would have to do to sort of redefine woman as the activists say they want it to be, an essence of male or female, you would have to prove that that is in fact the authentic truth here. You would have to prove that there is such a thing as a kind of gendered soul that we have that can be departed from our body.
Why wouldn't you just have to prove that there is a small cohort of people who insistently and persistently, claim that they are born into the wrong?
What does that mean?
Because I have a right to self-preservation. Feminism is often written off by the Western world as a bygone conclusion, as a result of the past few generations living with the hard-won rights of previous women's work, from the right to vote to being able to work, to have a bank account or own property. However, with each gain, there is pushback, and gender ideology is this generation's opposition to feminism, but shrouded in the language of liberalism and progress. Rights such as the single-sex spaces or protection against sex-based discrimination are being eroded in law. Hard-won rights to compete in sports, to be safe when vulnerable, such as in jails, hospitals, and changing rooms, and to be able to campaign against unjust treatment based on being female, are all being pushed aside in order to concede to delusions.
It has been fascinating to watch these leftist women completely abandon the Me Too movement and completely abandon believe all women, and now they are berating women for having basic safety concerns whenever it comes to men entering our spaces. Like, you're really making fun of women for being concerned for their safety. It's not that women are afraid of seeing a man's bits and pieces, though I'm personally not trying to see them. It's that women don't want to be put into a position where they're afraid of being assaulted. It's that little thought in the back of our mind that says, what if? It's that extra step of precaution because you just don't know. It's forcing women to take on the burden of insecurity and fear so that we don't hurt a man's feelings. It's the compromise of women's safety to validate men. And let's not forget women who have survived an assault. Okay, do they not have a right to be afraid? No, of course not, because according to these women, if we speak on our fears and our concerns, we are transphobic. This shit is coming to an end. Women, if you see something, say something, do something, get someone to help you. And rest assured, the feelings of mentally ill men are not more important than your need for safety.
I, and all women, have a right to preserve the recognition of our sex and the way that we experience life as a result of being female. Because I oppose bigotry. Laws against discrimination based on sexuality were built on an acknowledgement of biological sex, as in the expectation for a woman to marry a man, and the rejection of same-sex relationships was built on sex-based stereotypes. Therefore, it is considered sex-based discrimination to discriminate against people based on their sexuality. The presentation of gender identity as equally important to biological sex perpetuates stereotypes as natural and indivisible from sex, and makes it impossible to argue against misogyny or homophobia in law. And all of this doesn't even cover the resulting homophobia of pressuring gender nonconforming and homosexual people into transitioning, instead of striving for wider acceptance. And finally, because material reality and truth matters.
If you're asking me if I'm gay, I am gay because I'm a lesbian. When I tell people that, they go, no, that's not what I meant. And I'm like, well, you're asking me then if I'm straight, and then their brains break. It's not about wishing that I were a woman, it's about knowing that I'm a woman and people not believing me. hey, which bathroom do you use? It's like, how about let me decide that? How about don't worry about that? Like, are you going to build me a bathroom right now? Then we don't need to talk about it right now.
Getting pregnant and having a baby doesn't make me a woman because women don't own pregnancy.
Trans and non-binary people give birth all over the world every single day, and what I did is nothing new.
After years of trying to become a dad, it finally came true.
I use they/them pronouns for Wilder, and I keep their assigned gender private. I don't want it to change the way that people interact with and treat my child.
At its core, anyone who values truth and understands the necessity of facing reality in order to effect change should oppose gender ideology for the way that it requires individuals to blatantly deny generations of scientific and rational knowledge to protect the feelings of a delusional few, all while destroying modern science. After all, the recording of gender identity over biological sex ruins data collection and makes it impossible to use that which does not make this distinction, in turn impacting medical research, legislation, and more. Another common question is, who hurt you? And this question assumes that I am opposing you out of misguided spite and hatred born from an individual's treatment of me, rather than from rational analysis. It assumes that my personal experiences are unimportant and thus can be discarded. It ignores the value of pattern recognition in determining my behavior going forward. And finally, it's a quip meant to delegitimize experiences of women, when gender ideology itself posits that individual and personal experiences should shape law and culture. At its core, the question is ill-intentioned and misogynistic. This, dear viewers, is where we part. These are all pretty stupid questions, and they're very common. Why do you care so much? Why are you so obsessed? Who hurt you? And these questions are obviously not meant to get an actual response. They don't really care. After all, everyone knows that the direction that sex-based violence works in. Men hurt women. Men perpetuate sexual violence against women. You are going to be hard-pressed to find a single woman who is not at least aware of the capacity men have for sexual violence against women. We cater our lives around avoiding it. And when it comes to why do you care, it's so self-centered. You can care about things that don't directly impact you, and that's typically what the question actually means. This shouldn't affect you. You're not part of the incarcerated women. You're not in that bathroom. You're not in this position, so why do you care? Because I have basic empathy for others and also a brain. I don't really recommend engaging with individuals who ask these questions because they don't really care what you say in response. But I figured it was worth at least explaining why, so that those of you who hate watch my channel maybe can open your eyes a little bit as to why people oppose gender ideology. It's not because everyone's just a horrible bigot who hates trans people. There are legitimate reasons for disliking gender ideology because it contains considerable harm towards women and children. Anyhow, if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comment section down below. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!